Hi there, welcome to British Cycling and TrainingPeaks' first webinar on coaching for women and girls. Now, I'm Andy Kirkland and I'm a coaching and education officer at British Cycling. I'm also a level 3 coach and I'm a British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences physiologist. On my right here, I've got Helen Scott, who's a Paralympic pilot, and Helen got 2 medals at the 2012 Olympics in London, and she's our most recently qualified level 3 track coach as well. Now, towards the final bit of the webinar, I'm going to bring in Melissa Schwartz from TrainingPeaks, and she's the education manager over there in Colorado, and she's going to share with us how to integrate coaching women within the TrainingPeaks software. Right. Now I'm getting a wee bit of lag on my computer, so here we go. Here's the pictures of us here. Right. Now, I'd really encourage you to follow us on Twitter as well. So we've got the hashtag coaching webinar, and you can see on the screen how to follow us. So we've got the BC Coaching Twitter, TrainingPeaks, and Helen's Twitter as well. So it would be great if you could register with that. Now, I'd really encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar on Twitter, so that gives access to everyone, and I will answer the ones I can during the broadcast. If we're not able to answer them throughout, I will arrange a post either through Twitter or on the British Cycling website to answer your questions afterwards. Right, so aims of the webinar tonight, we're going to first of all look at the differences, or indeed the similarities, between male and female athletes. Now, most of us that are tuning in tonight will be coaches, so the most important thing in that regard is how these differences affect our coaching practice. What's really exciting as well about tonight is we've got Helen's experience within the Great Britain cycling team. So I'll talk about the theory, but Helen will relate that to her own experiences and the experience we'll pass over to Melissa over in Colorado with the joys of technology, and she'll look at how to track training data using the TrainingPeaks software. Right, so just a bit of an introduction on what we're doing here at British Cycling. So what we want to do is get a million more women cycling by 2020. So this webinar is part of that strategy to encourage more women onto their bikes. Now, we see within the diagram here, we've got 40 young women who have joined the Young Volunteers program, and some of these volunteers have successfully moved into coaching. So that's great for the future of the sport. Now, you'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner of our screen that we've also got 1,463 female coaches that are qualified through British Cycling. And what's exciting for us is that that's 23% of the total coaching population, which is 5% above average in sport within the United Kingdom. Now, we're not complacent, and that's part of the aim of this program, is to get more women coaching. So the more women we get riding their bikes, we're hoping that that'll translate into more females coaching. Now, within the diagram you see just now, we've got a framework within British Cycling that goes from level 1 through to level 3 coaching. Quite similar to the system over in the United States too. So we have got level 1, which is typically grassroots cycling, learning the basic techniques around cycling, whereas our level 3 is looking more at the performance side of the sport. You'll see here that we've got quite a high proportion of women coaches within level 1, so nearly 40%. Now we've got a drop-off as we move up to level 3, but we would expect that the more and more women we get involved within racing, the more they will feel empowered and come into coaching within cycling. So that's really important, really positive with Helen here as well, coming from the squad and moving into coaching. We've got some really good examples within British Cycling as well. We've got Monica Eden, one of our talent coaches within the British Cycling development program, and we've got a number of other very, very successful female coaches within the programs that we've qualified.
Andy, I think also looking at that graph there, you know, for me, obviously the level 3 is all about sort of the more elite performance. And for me personally, being on the GB team, I've seen a lot more women involved in sort of the high level performance, not so much as coaching, but as physiologists and like you say, talent team coaches. And, you know, now trackside we have almost as many women as men. Obviously this isn't coaches at the moment, but it's so great to see more women being involved in all kinds of the sport. Obviously being a coach at level 3 level and elite level is sort of the blue ribboned sort of, you know, job, I suppose. You know, when you see our athletes riding at World Cups and World Champs at the Olympics, you see the coaches trackside. So, you know, maybe that's something about confidence with the women, feeling that they're not sort of up to coaching alongside the men. I mean, the men that we have, you know, Ian Dyer, Jan, they're fantastic coaches. They've got, you know, a massive of experience. So that is quite daunting, I suppose, for some women who are coming forward. But the more women we see taking up more other important roles within the sport, hopefully that will, you know, encourage more women to sort of think, yes, I can coach as well, and I want to be involved in this. So hopefully we'll see that increasing over the next few years.
Now, great point, Helen. And what we're doing as well within British Cycling is, well, if you watch the Space Watcher website, there'll be resources, so PDFs that you can download, web articles and whatever, going into some of the specifics on coaching female riders. We've already got a number of articles lined up of people that are already out there doing great practice, so we want to inspire through example, giving examples of the qualified coaches we've got, not necessarily working for British Cycling, but ones that we've qualified, doing a great job and encouraging more people into the sport. Right, now we've got a picture here of Chris Newton and Laura Trott here. So this is a picture showing what we would, lots of people imagine the coach-rider relationship to be. So we've got a male coach coaching a female rider. Now, what we typically see throughout sport is females coaching other female athletes, not necessarily in cycling, but say in predominantly women-dominated sports like netball, gymnastics or whatever. There's more women coaching other females. What we see less of is the female coach coaching male riders. Now, I get coached probably 4 times a week. I do triathlon at quite a low level, but I find that I really get motivated, encouraged by female coaches. I feel they look at me as an individual. They're really interested in what I'm doing, and it motivates me more actually than working with a male. Now, that's a really personal perspective, but it says to me that everyone, regardless of their gender, has a role and can make a real difference within the sport. And it's really important that we take the best people, the best communicators, and there's absolutely no reason why there's any bias, why we've got, say, 10% female coaches at level 3. I think we're missing a trick there, that the more and more females we get coaching at the higher level, I think the experiences of individual athletes will be enhanced and we'll see better performances as well. So I think it really is for the good of the sport.
I think it's a shame really that we don't see more, women at the higher end of the sport. And she was absolutely fantastic, and it might be something worth thinking about, having the coaches take their riders from the talent team all the way up through all the different performance pathways of British cycling. That might be a way to obviously help the rider and help the coach to move forward with their profession as well. And obviously the rider will benefit from that because they will have had a variety over the years. And to be honest, it's not about sort of the gender of the coach, it's how much you, I suppose, respect and how much expertise your coach has and how you feel that they can make you a better rider. So it's very, very individual.
Great. Right, I've got a slide up now, and what I'm trying to show you here is that males and females are different on average. So if we look at the average female physiology against average male physiology, it's going to be different. Same as behaviour. So it's really helpful to think that there are differences there, and understanding where these differences lie when we're looking at individuals as well. So it gives us a starting point to start to understand the individual. But we see within the diagram as well that we see the bars crossing over. So that's saying to us that there's lots of similarities between individuals as well. Now, we've got books like Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus saying that there's really big differences and highlighting these differences. And we don't necessarily think that that is helpful to the debate on coaching, because if you look at, for example, one of the important things in the science that there's a lot of talk about is neurology and the difference between male and female brains. But when you delve into the evidence, what the neurologists are saying is that there are so many similarities within the male and female brains that the common literature, so the things that you pick up in the bookshop, are not necessarily the case. We really do need to look at everyone on an individual basis. Right, now we're talking about differences between males and females here, and up here we talk about different components of performance. So within that we talk about technical, tactical, psychological and physiological. Now within that diagram I would certainly say that there's no reason why males and females should be any different technically or tactically within racing. We definitely do see some differences if we watch races. So there may be a perception that females are don't handle a bike as technically well, but there is no reason why that should be the case apart from maybe confidence. So it's very, very important to say males and females should be able to employ the same tactics. They've got the same technical ability, and as coaches we've got to realize that and expect the same level of performance regardless of the gender of the athlete. So what we really want to do this evening is concentrate on the psychological and the physiological differences, because these are the things that are really useful to understand a bit more about. Within the science though, so if we look at universities, if we look at academic papers, whatever, we look at psychology and physiology as separate disciplines. But within coaching, what we do is have problems. So problems we need to overcome to enhance performance. So they may be related to physiology, they may be related to psychology, but we want to look at them together as one thing. And I think that's what I want to get across in this presentation this evening, is that physiology and psychology are intrinsically linked. They're not really different things. We've got one body, so it's one whole system working together at the same time. So there might be something going on in our mind that's got the result of a chemical reaction in the body. So we're looking at one and the same thing. We're looking at performance and how to get the best out of individuals. Right, so I'm going to ask Helen a question here. So I'm putting her on the spot a little bit. Right, can you tell me what physiology is to you? So what does it mean?
To me, when I think of physiology, I think of maybe sort of how the body's made up, how we use our different energy systems, you know, anaerobic for sprinting, aerobic, obviously endurance, and the crossovers in between.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and I think when we are using software like TrainingPeaks and talking about functional threshold power, things like that, they've got physiological underpinnings, and we tend to think about physiology as primarily energy systems. So what's our aerobic threshold, or what's our functional threshold, what's our sprint power like? But it's a bit more complex than that. What we sometimes forget about is hormones and the influence that they have. So we talk about the energy systems within our coach education resources, components of fitness and whatever, but something that there's generally not much of a focus on are hormones. Now, hormones are the chemical messengers that communicate between the body systems. So what they do, they influence our behavior, and also related to that is muscle and bone growth, energy, metabolism, and reproductive function. Now, that's where the key differences lie between males and females, that we see different levels of hormones between males and females that affect each of these components. And within that, we do have behavior as well. So one thing that I've measured within, say, the elite performance side is the testosterone cortisol ratio, and that's something we look at to identify overtraining syndrome. But within males and females, we typically have different levels of testosterone and cortisol, which influence the way we behave as well. So it's a really important thing to think about when we're identifying differences. Something else that we've got to bring into the debate is nature versus nurture. So we've got all the science identifying key differences, but typically what the science does is take a snapshot, one moment in time, and it tells us about someone in one moment in time. So we might measure the difference between a male and a female on a specific day and say, here, they're different. But what we've got to take into account there is sociological perspective. So what's happened throughout their life? What's happened in their day-to-day life that's influenced the way they behave? And has that had an influence on the way their body is adapted as well? So it may be that we're seeing differences that aren't a result of a physical difference per se, but the environment in which an athlete has been brought up. Now, as a coach, what we can't do is manipulate the genetic makeup of an athlete. We can't do much about that. So someone like Helen here, really good athlete, she's obviously got good genes enabling her to do what she does. But what we can do through coaching is set an appropriate environment in which she can perform at her very best. And that's one of the reasons we believe British Cycling is so successful, is because the coaches set an environment in which athletes can perform at their very, very
on the team, and it's that we the castle to the best. So going obviously into all of the science is very important, but simply, you know, psychological and physiological, you know, you aren't going to perform at your best obviously one has to be firm before the other one can be at its best as well. So, you know, this isn't necessarily a gender difference. It's all very individual. You know, there are a lot of guys on our squad who go to see the psychologist, you know, for reasons, you know, they're probably so strong and in the gym and on the track, but you know, that maybe they're lacking in confidence, and it's exactly the same for the girls. So, you know, each individual is very different, and each individual needs different things from their training. And as I said, you know, their coaches, it's really important for coaches to just learn how they work and how, you know, they might be coaching 10 different people, but each one of those 10 people are going to respond differently to different types of training, to how they're approached, how they're talked to. So it's very important that, you know, we get the basics first, and, you know, that's sitting down and saying, look, how do you work? What's best for you? How are you going to perform at your best? And put those things in place. So I think that's quite a good thing to live by, is, you know, you're the king and queen of your castle, and, you know, the coaches at the end of the day are there to make that person into the best that they can be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Helen, and something that I've heard from a number of really good psychologists that I've worked with in the past as well, is that we talk about periodizing training, but if we've got a behaviour or we've behaved in a certain way all our life, that won't be able to change overnight. So we've got to periodize the psychological side. So we can't expect a change after a 5-minute chat with a psychologist. It may take several years to understand and help an individual progress so that they're able to behave and perform at their very best in the most challenging of circumstances. Right, this picture here, it's really showing that individuals are really driven by emotion and what they feel. And human beings tend to seek out pleasant feelings, whether they're positive or not negative. We all tend to do things that feel good, even in the short term. So for most of us here, it's doing exercise. For other people in the short term, it might be having a glass of wine in the evening because there's a pleasant feeling. So we seek out these pleasant experiences, and we try and avoid or think of unpleasant feelings as negative. So when we're talking about setting an environment, we want it to be as pleasant, or we want to motivate people to seek out what can help them hit the best level of performance that they can. Now, there is a biological basis behind that, so it's not just based on what's going on in our head, so what we're thinking. There's a chemical response there as well, and that's really divided into these sections I've shown on the diagram in front of you. So we've got that individuals are influenced by the challenge or threat state. So in an individual circumstance, does someone feel it to be a challenge? Do they want to hit it head on and push really hard, or do they find it a threat and wish to pull away from it and maybe hide away? Now, what the research in that area has shown is that there tends to be a higher level of anxiety within female we want as coaches to recognize that, to understand that other people may be different, so other females may like that challenge, but we find that there's higher levels of anxiety within females, so we need to set the environment that best supports that. Same through achieving, so that sets out a dopamine response. Now, some individuals, they've got a brain that's really sensitive to dopamine, and they've got to keep on achieving just to get that feeling good feeling about them. And that means they need to achieve all the time. But within that diagram. So it's really important to have an environment in which people can relax, they don't feel threatened, and they can perform at the very best.
We've just had a question from Martin. The same program. From my point of view, I mean, this is quite tricky, and I think it's quite common in a lot of clubs. I know that back home in Halesowen we had exactly the same sort of environment, and I think it's just sort of setting the session and having different sort of goals in each session for different people. So, you know, the boys at that sort of age, they will go for the outcome goals for sure, you know, first one to cross the line after 10 laps, and they love that. But the girls, you know, like Andy was saying, you know, they're a little bit more in there with the lads, you know, try and sit on one of the boys' wheels for, you know, 5 laps and, you know, give it a go. You know, if it doesn't work, that's fine. Maybe go off the front, you girls pair up and go off and work as a team. And, you know, if they don't finish the race, they don't finish the race, but they might have, you know, achieved that goal within that race. So it's very tricky. I mean, what would you suggest, Andy?
Well, I think it's very, very important to have feedback session after the session to see how everyone's found it. So it may be on an individual basis, so it's really important to speak to people away from the group as well as within the group, to really get to understand their perceptions of what's going on, because the 14 to 18 age group is the time when we lose an awful lot of people to the sport, specifically females, because of that really challenging environment. So I think it's important to understand how they're feeling within a specific session, if they're feeling threatened within the environment, or if it's too much for them, and setting up activities. So it might be working together as a team, getting boys and girls together within that team and working together. So you're recognizing everyone's strengths and weaknesses. So we want to build the whole rider, someone that can go into a team and work as right. Now, within differences as well, we've looked at some research on differences between males and females, and some of the headings we've got here, we've got communication, confidence, reflection, feedback, and sitting and standing. To all riders, but specifically with more females than guys. So it's important that they feel very valued by the coach, and the coach is buying into what they're doing. So it may be if a rider asks the coach a question saying, why are you doing this, or why are you doing that? It's not a challenge to the coach, it's purely because the rider is genuinely interested in what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that level of communication is really important for the coach to buy into what the rider's saying. So a saying I like to use is that we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. The coach should use them in that proportion. So within a session or working one-to-one with a rider, I want to hear the rider speaking doubly the amount that I'm saying. It's really more important what the rider says than what I'm saying as a coach. So that's one difference within communication. What we also see is that females tend to lack as much confidence as males in many environments. So sometimes we need to work on building that confidence side. So it's not a case of setting a specific physical session and saying, right, I want you to do 5 times 4 minutes at a specific intensity. It may be that you've got to work within that session to build up the confidence of the rider as well. So it's not just about telling them what to do. Have you got any thoughts there, Helen?
I mean, it is all about those 4 points, really, Andy. You know, speaking from personal experience, you know, it's great to sort of feel valued within your team. You know, recently I've raced and it's gone extremely well, and I've had some positive feedback from my coach, and you know, just a few words like that sort of changed my whole sort of outlook. You know, in 10 minutes, you know, the coach really does have to sort of work on how they communicate with their riders, you know, individually, and like you say, building, you know, that trust and communication between you is very, very important. You know, that it's important that the rider feels their coach is approachable as well, like you say, so they can ask questions and feel like, you know, they're getting everything that they need out of the sessions.
Mm. Oh, definitely. And what we also see is, well, is that feedback's particularly important. So what we say and how we say it to individuals. So it may be that I've got a specific thought in my head, so I'll go, oh, you could have worked a bit harder within that session, and a rider may go away and reflect on that more after the session, thinking, oh, Andy doesn't think I work hard enough, or I'm not good enough, and whatever. So it's really important to understand how your rider reflects on the feedback that you give to them. So when they come back to another session, exploring how they've felt about that feedback that you've provided them, because get it wrong and there can be quite serious implications with riders if they take what you've said to them in the wrong way, and that often happens through reflection. Also within a team environment, we talk about fitting in and standing out. Now within a team environment with females, sometimes it's not seen as positive for a rider to excel far more than another rider. That may be viewed as negative by the rest of the group. So it's very important to recognize that success is fine, but to understand that team dynamic and how that success is perceived by others. So it's really important to have team goals and for everyone to be supportive regardless of if someone's been more successful than another is.
Oh, completely. You know, there are lots of team events, obviously, in cycling, but at the end of the day, it is all very individual and individual performance. And okay, you know, you get to a session and maybe your times aren't as quick as somebody else, but you know, it's all about yourself, and you can't lose sight of what you're doing just by comparing yourself. You know, this goes from all ages to other riders. So you know, you have to create an environment where the riders are confident in what they're doing, they understand what they're doing and how it will make them improve, and just make sure they're focused on themselves so that every session they come away and say, do you know what, I got a PB today, you know, I might not have been as quick as so-and-so, but, you know, I'm moving forward. And I think that's so important to, you know, there are lots of comparisons, and, you know, girls and boys, they are different. You know, us girls are never, you know, we're not going to go as fast as Jason Kenny. It's not going to happen, but, you know, we can be the fastest girl, you know, in the world. You know, it's good to compare, it's good to sort of have that in your sights, but, you know, at the end of the day, females and males are different, but you just have to improve the individual. That's all you can do.
Great. Now, we've got a great comment from B. Gregory on Twitter saying that mentoring will help females build confidence. Now, in fact, mentoring will help build confidence with most riders. And we had a great comment from Roger Hammond at the British Cycling Coaching Conference last year, saying that how he had worked with Mark Cavendish. And what he said was that the coaches paired up the less experienced riders with more experienced riders, just because it was a different dynamic that the younger rider could learn from the more experienced rider. So mentoring is really, really important. Right, I'm a wee bit conscious of time, Helen, so I'd better get moving on. So we've got physiology and health as well, so looking at differences there. Now, we've got 4 areas that are important to consider. So we've got growth and development, training, menstrual cycle, and energy deficit. Now, we've already had a question about the 14 to 18-year-old age group. So within growth and development, what we see is that females tend to mature physiologically and psychologically earlier than males do. So that has implications on how they're coached. What we also see is females tend to reach they come closer to their absolute potential earlier on. Now there's a physical development reason for that, just through the way females mature. What's particularly important within the growth and development stage is nutrition, though. What we see is quite a lot of implications across a number of sports, not specifically cycling, but where females focus too much on their weight too early in their development, and that can have quite serious implications on health later. So I'll talk briefly about the energy deficit later in the presentation and the effect that can have on bone growth. We've got training. So what's important to consider when we're coaching anyone is the demands of an event. Now, what we see is that female races tend to be that bit shorter than male races, so the volume of training doesn't necessarily have to be quite as high. It may be different in sprint disciplines, but certainly with endurance, the races tend to be a bit shorter. A very important implication, though, is because we have got less females riding, say, at junior level, what we see is youths moving straight up into senior category, and that jump is really, really big for a lot of riders. So they going from a 15-year-old to racing female elites can be extremely challenging. So within these constraints, it's very, very important as a coach to set specific expectations as juniors and say, we're looking to see what you're like in a few years and dealing with the challenges there.
Exactly. You know, that's where it's important to sort of include process goals rather than outcome goals. You know, if they're going straight from junior to senior, you know, it's unrealistic to expect your rider to even, you know, potentially last the whole distance of a race. So, you know, saying, you know, let's try and get to halfway in the laps, if say if it's a track race, or half the time on the road race, and make little steps like that, because, you know, if there was a middle ground, you know, that's the sort of thing that they'd be looking at. So you need to sort of create those smaller goals on the way up to achieving success at senior level on the way forward.
Wonderful, Helen. Now we've got a question from Robin Fox on Twitter. Do we feel that female-only sessions are more effective than mixed sessions? I would say it depends.
It completely depends. I've had no experience of female-only sessions myself. The only thing I would say might be quite good is if it's a mixed session, but different timings. So the girls are up at one point, the boys are up, so they have a chance to watch each other, and, you know, in that way they're respecting each other, cheering each other on. You know, that might be confidence boosting for the girls. But female-only sessions, I'm not really sure about.
I think it's really important in some contexts, so especially for less experienced riders or riders that are new to the sport and may lack the self-confidence to come up against males. I think there's things like body image that can be an issue within different areas of the community as well. So for me, I assume as a male that it's not a problem. I don't mind wearing lycra, whatever. But for someone that's new to the sport, that might be quite a challenge, simply wearing the clothing. And they may feel more comfortable in a female-only session. And we've got that experience through the British Cycling Breeze network, where we're setting up rides for females specifically to go out and just ride and have fun. So that's the participation side. So I think it really depends on who you're working with and working out what works for them. One thing that is rarely mentioned as well is the menstrual cycle. So how does that affect performance? And why is it not talked about within coaching? So two of the reasons that it's not talked about within coaching is, first of all, some females find that it doesn't affect their performance, so the coach doesn't need to know about it, and they don't tell the coach because there's absolutely no implication on the training program at all. The other side of it, though, is that it might affect them substantially, but they might not be comfortable with discussing it with a coach. So as a male coach, I need to look at ways to approach that subject, whether I can do it directly or getting someone else to do it, or having that rider mentor to do it as well, so that it's building that relationship of trust and confidence that we can really talk about anything that has an influence on a rider's life that is important to talk about.
It is a very sensitive subject, but I think it's extremely important, especially if the female, aspires to be, a full-time athlete. It's something that does need to be discussed, and like you say, the coach needs to sort of find ways to sort of bring it into conversation, just so they're aware. It might not affect the rider, but if it does, it's very, very important for the rider to feel confident enough to sort of mention it, or like you say, to speak to somebody else, so that they can pass it on if they don't feel comfortable talking about it.
Brilliant. Now, I'm really getting aware that Melissa's not going to get much to speak about if I don't get a move on, but something that we see in a lot of the literature is, it says that the menstrual cycle doesn't affect performance. But if we look at the things it does affect, so a rider's core temperature, breathing rate, blood sugar levels, or psychologically mood changes, then I would open up the question to you: does it affect performance? If it's affecting each of these variables, and I would say it depends. It depends on the individual, but it could have a substantial effect on a rider, or it might not have any effect whatsoever. But it could be, if a rider has premenstrual syndrome, it could affect every waking moment of their day at a particular time of the month. So for us to say that it doesn't affect training or it doesn't affect performance would be misguided in such a situation, and it's really, really important to be able to talk about it. Now, I've got this table up here. Now, I'm really pleased that one of the authors from the book that this comes from is listening in, so it's Dr. Simon Jobson. So hello, Simon. But this gives you a framework. I'm not going to talk about it in any detail, but it shows that how hormonal changes at different stages of the menstrual cycle can affect performance. Now, we're going to post this up on YouTube anyway, and we'll be sending you out a link so you can read through that in your own time, or it's got the reference at the bottom of the slide. So there's a really, really good chapter within that book that if you want to know more, then you'll be able to see that within the book. Right, moving on, energy deficit. Simply to maintain normal function of the body, we need to balance energy in versus energy out. So if we're doing lots and lots, you need to eat more. But what we've got to understand in that context is that most endurance athletes want to be lighter. So there's good evidence to suggest that if you ask virtually any endurance athlete, do you want to be lighter? Then they're going to say yes, because they believe it's got a positive performance implication. So the lighter you are, the faster you go. Within that as well, when we're dealing with elite performance or people that are focused on racing, they're really, really motivated individuals. So you set them a goal, they want to push towards it, and it's very, very easy for that to go over into diet as well. So if they're focusing on being lighter, they eat less. But that's got implications on the riders. We've also got to consider sociological pressures. I'll just ask the question, are these pressures on weight the same for males and females? I'll leave that open for you to think about in that context. Right, let's see what can happen though if there is an energy deficit. So if a rider isn't getting enough calories in within the day, we may see things like suppressed immune function. So that might be upper respiratory tract infections, so regular colds, muscle breakdown. So riders, if they've got a power meter, for example, we're seeing their power drop all the time, or there's signs over time that they're losing muscle. We've got bone health, which is a really important implication within cycling. So for there's been research done on general athletic populations that show athletes tend to have a greater bone mineral density than people that don't exercise very much. But research on professional male cyclists shows that they've in fact got lower bone mineral density than normal populations. So their bones aren't as strong because they're spending lots of time on their bike and not a great deal of time on loading the bones. Now, we also know that females' bones aren't as strong as males. So within that context, there can be very, very serious implications of energy deficit for females because their bones simply aren't as strong. So there can be conditions like osteoporosis can happen. Within that coaching perspective, especially with developmental athletes, it's important that they do some sort of exercise that loads the bone. So plyometrics, walking, a little bit of jogging, or even mountain biking will load the bones more than, say, riding on the road all the time. And we may have consequences if there's an energy deficit over months and months and months. So it may result in infertility. So within that, this is when I'll hand over to Melissa. When we're monitoring riders, we want to be looking at things like weight, not too much of a focus on it, but it wants to be monitored. Thinking about it in the context of the monthly cycle through fluid retention and whatever, people's moods, muscle injury, and their general health and well-being. We want to monitor these things regularly, and TrainingPeaks is a really, really useful tool to do so. So what do you think on that, Helen?
I think you know, the most important thing to take away, especially when coaching young individuals as well, is, you know, the rider at the end of the day, you want them to be as healthy as possible. You know, there are a lot of different focuses when you become elite. Not always very comfortable to talk about, you know, losing weight and things like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, I talk to my strength and conditioning coaches, and he's always saying, you know, we're not just trying to make you stronger to ride your bikes faster. You know, we want you to come away from this sport, you know, fit and healthy. You know, we don't want you to have back problems. We don't want you to have knee problems, ankle problems. And it goes through every aspect, you know. You need to make sure that your athlete isn't sort of starving themselves. You know, it's got to be, you know, health is the number one priority. And if they're not healthy, you know, they're not going to be performing, and they're not going to be happy either. So there's a lot of factors to take in, and it's very important that, you know, you concentrate on each one individually.
That's great, Helen. Now, what I'm going to do now is hand over to Melissa in Colorado. So, Melissa, apologies in advance for not giving you as much time as we would have liked to hear, but I'm going to pass over to Melissa in Boulder now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andy. No, this is really, really interesting information just for myself as a coach and as a female athlete. It's definitely some good stuff here. So I'm just going to switch over so you guys can see my slides. All right. So let me get rid of this. Okay, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, just in the time that we have left. There are just three things that I want to talk about and point out that relate back to what Andy and Helen were saying at the beginning of this webinar. There are many, many different things that you can do with TrainingPeaks. And I'm speaking with a coach's voice. So there's a lot of things that you can do as an athlete, but what I'm going to be talking about is from the coach's perspective. I'm quickly going to go through just tracking data and metrics for women. It also can apply for girls, but usually we talk more about female athletes that are, 15 or older. I'm also just briefly going to touch on individual coaching for women and then coaching groups of women. And the groups of women is something that we see like coaching groups or coaching 3 people at one time. We're seeing that a lot more with women specifically as opposed to groups of men. So I'm going to go through how to do that. So the first thing here is tracking metrics. Now, this is just a screenshot of the metrics that I personally track in my own athlete account, but there are actually 59 different metrics that you can add to this tracking mechanism. And depending on the type of athlete and maybe the age of the female that you're working with, you may or may not want to have them track certain things. For example, if you have an adolescent female who is in that touchy time frame that Andy and Helen were talking about, where we don't want them to think about losing weight or we don't want them to be worried about their weight, maybe this is a female who's getting into the sport because her friend is and her main goal is to lose some weight and just get moving. Then it would be nice to have that athlete tracking their weight. So there's a lot of different things that you can do depending on the type of person that you're working with. We also have sleep. So you can read a lot of studies and talk to a lot of people, and they'll tell you the importance of so encourage my athletes to track, especially if they are busy moms who work, or even if they're working at home with their kids. They're probably not sleeping very much. And actually the practice of tracking it, that itself can just make them more aware of getting to bed earlier. Some other things to point out here, menstruation. So maybe the athlete's not comfortable with you talking about menstruation, especially if you're a male coach, but just encouraging them to track it. So it's kind of like a passive conversation. You're not in there talking to them about it if they're not comfortable with it, but they're at least tracking it. So they know if they are starting to skip periods, then that could be a sign of something going wrong or increased potential for stress fractures. But just getting them to go in here and track it is also a really good thing to do. And then another one that's on here, I actually don't know if you guys can, if it is on here, but injury. So injury is another one, and if you've got someone who tends to be injury prone, you can have them like every day or every week. How are you feeling? Like if your hips are bothering you, make sure you write that down, and then you'll have a record of what that looks like. I'm just going to get out of this and show you the live version of what that tracking metrics is. So here you have my TrainingPeaks coach account. This athlete is actually me, my athlete account. And if I were to go in here and track a metric, it's as simple as just clicking on the plus sign. This is how I track workouts or I track meals. And it's also how I track metrics. So I would just put in here and say, I slept 6.5 hours last night and add it to my calendar. So it's actually something that I do, and then I chart it. So here you can see I charted my weight and I charted my hours slept shortly after having a baby. And this is just an example, a real life example of what that can look like. Okay, tracking metrics. So I'm going to move on to that. And if anyone has any questions for me regarding TrainingPeaks, feel free to put them in the little question area. I'm not going to get to them right now, but I will look at them and I will get back to you offline with any questions that you guys have. Also, you can email coach@trainingpeaks.com, and that also will get to me or get to someone on the customer success team. So this right here is just an example of charting metrics I showed you on my account. You can chart 2 metrics against each other. So it's also nice to see the relevance. Let's say you have someone who you're tracking menstruation and you're tracking injury. You can kind of see those 2 can be correlated, and you can track towards goals. So like I said, if you do have a female who maybe is just coming into the sport as someone who just wants to get fit and get moving, and say she wants to lose 15 pounds, coach who is working one-on-one with an athlete. Write workouts in TrainingPeaks, but even if you cannot write them, but you can just look at what your athletes are doing, you can still use TrainingPeaks and encourage your athletes to track what they're doing, especially if they have something like a power meter that's very easy to upload. And one thing that we have found with women and power meters is they tend not to really dig into the data. Version. This is a workout with my coach, so she's prescribing me these workouts. I go in here, so I'm doing this in a couple days. I'll go in here and I'll do this workout and I'll upload my power taps, and my coach will get it, and then she will be able to give me feedback on my workout. So really that goes with females or and communication, like building rapport with your athletes. With TrainingPeaks, we've got this thing called post-workout notifications. And what that means is the minute I track that I did something, my coach gets an email with all that information. So she replies to it. I love her. I've been working with her for 5 years, and the #1 reason, even though I feel like she's a great coach, it's because I have that rapport with her and we've got that great communication. And that's just what, as a female, that's what I love. So she gets the email, she reads my comments, reads my questions, and she gets back to me via email. And she knows how to talk to me. She knows like how much us to have that communication back and forth. And it makes me feel like she's the only coach, or I'm her only athlete in the whole world, even though that's not the truth. So switching back over, next I'm gonna, well here, communication is key. Basically a post-workout notifications, great way to communicate with your athlete. And if you're not using those, you can just log into your account and you can see what your athletes are posting, and you can see when they've completed workouts. And then finally, coaching groups. So, I could talk about these 3 topics for an entire hour. But like I said when I started a couple minutes ago, is we're seeing more and more groups, like smaller groups, and they're usually all women. And it's a case of like, hey, I'm training for a century ride, and I want to do it with my girlfriend. So my friends, the 3 of us, might get together and pay a coach to write us a program so we can go out and ride this hard century ride. And the coach is just doing one plan, but we're paying him together for 3 people. So there's a feature called Dynamic Plans in TrainingPeaks, which allows you to write one calendar, and it updates to the 3 athletes' calendars. So, and that's nice, kind of a lot of the way that we're seeing some coaching going here. I'll just show you an example. This is a real life example. This coach account is for Team and Training. Not sure if you guys have Team and Training in the UK, but basically this is an account where I had two groups of runners. And I was able to use our feature called Dynamic Plans and just update one calendar, and then it updated all 30 athletes that were attached to that same program. So I'd be happy to answer some questions if you guys have them. You can always just email coach@trainingpeaks.com. We're happy to even spend some time with you on the phone. If you want to schedule an hour or however long, just ask and we'll do it. So let me pop back over to here. That's pretty much all I have, Andy and Helen. I'll pass it back over to you guys if you guys want to do a wrap up.
Right, thanks, Melissa. Just confirm that you can hear me from here.
Yeah, I can. Yep, I can hear you.
That's brilliant. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, first of all. It's been great to have our first webinar, hopefully first of many, in a new way of delivering CPD within British cycling. So if you've got any ideas, by all means, tweet them. A very, very big thank you to Helen for giving up her evening, because
Thank you for having me.
she's working really hard at the moment, and it's brilliant that she really is our latest level 3 track coach. So that, and probably our youngest level 3 coach as well. So that's really brilliant. Thanks to Liz, who's been monitoring Twitter tonight, and Vinny, the boss, over the way, just making sure we're behaving and telling Helen and I to hurry up as well. And a final very, very big thank you to Melissa and Dirk over at TrainingPeaks for hosting the webinar for us. It's been a really good experience to work with TrainingPeaks. Great product as well. So we do endorse it. It's something Helen was for us to be working with TrainingPeaks at British Cycling. So thanks very much to everyone this evening. And if you've got any questions, post them up on Twitter, and we're happy to answer them at British Cycling as well. So if you email at us at coaching@britishcycling.org.uk, we'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks.